too fast, if I tend to cover things too fast, I want to make this as interactive as possible for you guys, because this presentation isn't for me, it's for you guys. And so if you're a realtor or an investor, you're going to learn a lot. But a lot of times with the audience, I don't really know who I'm speaking to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to speak to assuming that we don't know much about the topic. And then if I go too fast, just raise your hand and ask me questions during the presentation. All right. Let me know when you guys can see the screen.
We can see it.
You guys can see it. Does it look okay?
Yes, it does.
All right. Well, thanks again for attending. What this presentation is, it's purchasing a property using subject to financing. I'm going to present it from an investor standpoint, but also too, if you're a real estate agent and you have listings and the underlying mortgage is a lower interest rate, this is a good tool in your toolbox to help get that listing sold, especially if maybe the listing is overpriced. I know in Northern Virginia, the market's pretty hot, but in other places like DC, some parts of Maryland, the market's not so hot as it is in Northern Virginia. DC is pretty slow in some areas. So it's good for realtors as well as investors. This is basically who I am. I've got 25 years of real estate investing, licensed in Virginia, but technically I own a brokerage in Virginia, DC, and Maryland. My partner's the managing broker, and that's where he's licensed. We own a bunch of investment companies, which I'll get into on the next slide. Developed a car wash. We've developed a lot of single family developments, co-own a title company, president of Catholics for Housing. What I'm mostly responsible for in that organization, I'm the president, but we purchased a 60-unit distressed trailer park in Manassas, Virginia called East End Mobile Home Park. We've owned that for 5 or 6 years. I was the one that put that deal together. I have another charity called Clear Sky Sports Angels. What that does is that donates money to allowing you to participate in travel sports, the ones that can't afford it. And we've been doing that for a while. Expert Witness. I'm on a product called regularriches.com. And that's investing like rich people too. I did how to find the money and how to find distressed assets on that product. And then we just recently came out with a book, The Real Estate Investing Roadmap to Wealth. That just came out in December. I was just notified yesterday that it hit the bestseller list as far as mortgages and real estate investing. So we're pretty happy with that. Clear Sky Group, who are we? Clear Sky Properties. We have fixed and flipped over 400 houses. So that's pretty much how I got my start in the investment space. We still flip about 2 to 3 houses a month. COVID sort of shut us down a little bit because of lack of inventory, but we're starting to get up to a little bit more fix and flip in our portfolio. We have a residential rental portfolio, 50 residential properties in the area. Most of them are in Virginia. We have a few in Maryland. On an industrial parking lot for semi-truck trailers by the city, by the Manassas Airport. And we just store semi-truck trailers. Clear Sky Financials, probably how most of you guys know me. We have Clear Sky Financial is our hard money company. We're a private lender, asset-based lender, direct lender, DC, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, Florida. I'm what's called a balance sheet lender. So I don't broker loans. It's all our money. And so I'm in charge of all the money out in the street. I have another company called Clear Sky Holdings, LLC. We do primarily DC and Maryland tax lien certificate investing, if you guys know what that is. So we have a lot of money out there in tax lien certificates with DC and Maryland, PG County, Montgomery County for the most part in Maryland. That company also has a lot of residential rentals as well. We do some hard money lending, not much out of it. And the last company that we just started is Clear Sky Education. As I told you guys before, we've just put out a book, The Roadmap to Wealth in Real Estate Investing. We're pretty happy with it. It took us a long time to do it. I don't know that I'll ever do another book again. It was a lot of work. And we also have just started what's called a video web education series. We launched a pilot course back in December, and we're about ready to launch 4 to 10 other courses in that education series. And basically what it does is it follows the book, The Roadmap to Wealth. It takes somebody from no knowledge, no education, takes them through the roadmap, how to find distressed assets, how to find the money, And then it takes you, fix and flip investing, wholesaling, create your a capital stack. And then once you have your capital stack tranches in it, we teach you how to invest it into passive income investments in real estate. And that's basically what that book is. And so this is basically our roadmap to wealth in residential real estate investing. And where you guys are today, is you're here where it says finding the money. But what I'm about ready to present today is only like 1/10 of what we teach in finding the money. I was told to just do a financial seminar series of about 4 seminars in a row on different tranches of the money, and this is just one of the tranches that we teach is subject to. And so that's what we're going to cover today. We're going to cover subject to financing. And so one of the assumptions that I'm using is that this is primarily for investors, and it's used for fix and flips and buy and holds. But as realtors, this is also something that you need to know, because if you have a seller that's selling that has a low interest rate product and they don't mind maybe doing a subject to, and especially if you're having a tough time moving the property because maybe it's priced a little too high, this is a way to get that property sold, maybe to a buyer who might have a big down payment, but they don't, they might not have good enough credit to actually qualify for a normal loan. So this is something that you guys got to understand as well from a normal retail realtor perspective. All right, let's talk about the current economic environment. This is another one of these slides that I do with all my presentations, is I just want everybody to, and I know you guys know most of this stuff, but we're going to cover what the current environment looks like. And the reason why this slide is important is because of subject twos, and why subject twos are very, very important. We have a high inflationary environment right now. Even though the last couple months inflation has ticked down, and so it looks like we've got that under control. Rising interest rates. The Fed has risen interest rates 9 times in the last year. They wrote 4 3/4 interest rate hikes. They had 2 half-point hikes and 3 1/4 point hikes. That's a total of what? 4.75%. So the rates have gone up 4.75% from about a year ago. As a matter of fact, it might be about a year right now when rates started increasing. The 30-year mortgage hovered around 7% November 2022. Today's 30-year mortgage is about 6.75, give or take. Housing sales have slowed in some markets, and I need to caveat that because this is what's called a sub-development market. Washington, D.C. is selling totally different than Northern Virginia. PG County is selling totally different than Montgomery County. Same thing as Charles County. So you guys have got to really understand the inventory in your marketplace, because all these sub-development marketplaces are different. Some are going up in value, some are staying neutral, and some are going down. Probably, like I said, prices in DC actually are coming down, and that's for other factors. Some markets have multiple offers, others have none. You got to keep your eye on what's called the office space availability, especially for Class B and Class C. And the reason why I bring this up is because a lot of banks are holding on to a lot of paper in the Class B, Class C office space environment. And a lot of these Class B, Class Cs are vacant. They have a lot of vacancy. A lot of these loans need to be refinanced. The banks are going to have to recapitalize those loans because let's say if a bank has a $5 million loan on an asset, well, that asset might only be worth $2.5, $3 million today because of the vacancies. So they're going to have to write that down. And the reason why you want to keep track of that is because we think a lot of community banks might get gobbled up by the FDIC because of their capitalization structure. So keep an eye on that. I'm seeing a lot of foreclosure filings up. But what I am not seeing is that these foreclosure filings are not getting to the courthouse steps. So most of these auctions are getting canceled before they go to the courthouse steps. And so just be an eye on that. And then, like I said, in some areas, there's low residential inventory. All right, back to what you guys came for, the agenda. So what I'm going to talk about is subject to financing. I'm going to give you guys a definition. We're going to talk about why. I'm going to go over 4 types of subject to deals that you have to know about. I'll go through 3 deal examples. I'll go through a buy and hold example where we were a second trust as Clear Sky Financial. I'll go through a fix and flip deal that we did as Clear Sky Properties that we recently did. And I'll also do another fix and flip example where Clear Sky Financial was a second trust holder on it. And then I'll go through a sample deed in Virginia, sample deed in Maryland, kind of show you guys what it looks like. at their courthouse, when it's recording the public land records. We'll talk about advantages and disadvantages. The sun's not bright, sun's not shining all the time on subject twos. There are some disadvantages. I'll cover that. And then, I'll also cover how to find them. And so, like I said, if you guys have had experience with my presentations before, this is basically what I cover, because a lot of folks, I don't want folks leaving this presentation with, well, he never told me how to find them. He never gave me ideas. And that's one of the things that we do, because that's all we're doing is, we're searching for deals. I've got deals coming my way. And so one of the things I want to help you guys out is how do you find them, because that's the hardest part. Okay. What is subject to financing? It's where a purchaser, and I do have investor, because like I said, purchaser and investor could be the same thing. They take the right to the title of the property while the seller's existing mortgage stays in place, hence subject to, right? This isn't the same thing as an assumption. So you guys have to understand that an assumption is a totally different process. An assumption is where the bank approves you as a new borrower and then lets the seller go from their obligations. On a subject to, the existing mortgage stays out there on title. You get the title put in your name. So that's the difference between a subject to and assumption, and it's very important for you to know that. There's no formal bank process. As a matter of fact, the bank doesn't even know about it. The purchaser / investor just takes over payments. That's all they're doing. However, most mortgages have what's called a due on sale clause. If the servicer or the investor of that mortgage finds out that the deed has transferred, then they can call the note. They don't have the obligation, but they can call the note. That's something else that you guys really have to understand. Now, the question that you should be asking me is, how many times have I ever seen a note being called on an owner transfer on a subject to? And my answer is 0. I've never heard of it being called. Now, the reason behind that is as the new payer of that mortgage, you got to make sure you have a bunch of things in place so that thing doesn't get called. You got to make sure that your payments are on time. If it's a non-escrow loan, you better make sure those property taxes are paid on time. You better make sure that you have insurance against the property. So as long as you're doing the right things as the new payer of that mortgage, then odds are it's not going to get called. Okay. Again, from a liability standpoint, the purchaser doesn't have any liability to repay the loan. You had an ethnic, you need to pay it from an ethics standpoint, but you don't have any liability to pay it. So if the house goes to foreclosure, it goes back to the seller's credit. It doesn't affect yours. But, usually when you're doing a subject to, you're buying it as an investor, you're buying it to fix and flip, you're buying it to hold. So you already have a decent equity position on it. So you're not going to not make payments. So that really doesn't come to play. But the seller does have to understand that they're still on the hook for the liability of that note. Okay.
And do you have a question that was, I think, from prior to that? What is Class CB?
Oh, okay. So the way it works in the office space world is that your Class A's usually are your brand new office buildings that are being built that are only 4 or 5 years old, like a lot of those new high rises in Tyson's Corner. Those are all Class A. The Class B, Class C category of office space buildings are the ones that are 20, 30 years old. They've been around for a long time. They've got maybe antiquated air conditioner system. They're just older in nature. And so when you're trying to lease out space as an office, you're going to want to go to that Class A first. You're not going to want to rent out a Class B or Class C. So that's the difference. That's the difference. They're just older properties that have been there. Some could be 40, 50 years old. And so that's the difference. Okay. Why purchase subject to? Now, it reduces the cost to buy the home, right, from a title standpoint, because you're not re-recording anything related to the mortgage. There's no points, there's no fees. There's no mortgage owner's insurance, none of those lender fees. So it's a lot cheaper. It's a lot faster because the only thing that really gets transferred is the deed itself. There's more room for profit or cash flow if you keep it as a rental, provided you're getting into a lower interest rate subject to, which I'll get into in a second. And the primary reason is to take over the existing rate and further into the amortization schedule. So a lot of these mortgages out there obviously are 30-year mortgages. And so sometimes if you're, focusing on mortgages, and I'll get into this later in the slide, let's say you're focusing on a subject to mortgage that was originated in 2019, and it's a 30-year mortgage. Well, you're already 5 years into the AM schedule. which that's very positive because at that point in time, you're just paying a little bit more on the principal side as opposed to the interest side. So that's positive. It's also a method for somebody to purchase a property if you cannot qualify for a normal mortgage. It's just a beautiful tool to have in your toolbox. Okay. Um, so the next question you guys should be asking is why now? Why is subject to financing such a, such an important player right now in the, creative financing world? Well, what are we in now? Well, some folks might consider this a high interest rate environment, but dinosaurs like myself consider this a normal interest rate environment. See, we have been very, very spoiled in the last 7 or 8 years to have low interest rates. So there's a lot of low mortgages out there, whether it's purchase money or whether it's refinance money. So a lot of people out there have low mortgages that own homes. The education of the investor community. That's why now. I mean, this Sub two has a huge real estate organization that has just sprung in the last 3 or 4 years. And so there's a lot of other meetups that talk about sub twos as well, real estate investor meetup. So it's spreading. So the word is out about this thing called sub two. And so you guys just have got to get on the wave, understand what it is, and use that to your advantage. The other reason why now is because more title companies are doing these type of deals. About 5 or 6 years ago, in this area, there were only 1 or 2 title companies that would even do these deals. And the reason why the other title companies wouldn't do these deals was because they were worried about it from a risk standpoint. Maybe if the loan gets called, maybe they were worried about a lawsuit because they're not disclosing the title transfer to the bank. And so there were a lot of reasons why title companies weren't involved in this type of deal. But now, lately, there's a lot more title companies doing these deals. The other thing too is because the simplicity of purchasing and transferring a house. I'll show you one deal that we did a few years ago. It was a VHDA sub two that we didn't even use a title company to do the deal. We just basically had I had a lawyer create a deed. The seller signed off on the deed. We gave him some money, and then we recorded the deed with the recording fees, and that's that. Didn't even have a normal HUD-1. Didn't even go through a normal settlement. We just transferred the deed, and so I'll explain that transaction here in a second. The other thing that it does is that it brings in a buyer pool that could never have qualified for a mortgage. And that's pretty important to know because sometimes whether it's an investor, whether it's not an investor, if they have a chance to do a sub two on a loan that was originated in 2020 and you're having a tough time selling the house, but they might come up with $250,000 as a down payment and do a subject to on that property, you're probably going to sell them the property. Because with somebody putting that much money down to buy a primary residence, it's very doubtful that that person's going to walk from that mortgage. So you just, so that's another thing why. Okay, so let's cover the 4 types of subject to deals. There were only really 3 types, but I included a 4th type because I wanted to throw that in there so that you guys can understand a 4th type. The first type, and this is the most normal type, is what's called the cash to loan. And this is basically where, let's say you have an existing mortgage of $250,000, right? And the house is selling for $350,000. Well, what you would do is you'd put up $100,000 in cash, put it as a down payment, buy the house for $350,000, and you would go subject to the first. So that's you, the buyer, bringing cash to the table and buying the house and then subject to a loan. So that's the first type of subject to. The second type is a subject to with a seller carryback. And what that means is the seller is allowing you to do a subject to. You have probably put down a sizable down payment, but not enough to actually buy the entire property, including the first loan. And then what the seller does is they simply just carry a second trust as on top of the subject to trust. So you own the property, you put down a certain down payment that the seller might require. The seller then carries what's called a second trust on top of the subject to. So that's a subject to with seller carryback. The next type is a subject to with a hard money loan. And that's one of my deal examples that I'm going to show you guys is that us as a hard money lender, I do subject to deals all the time on the fix and flip space, especially where the buyer has a lot of room in the after repair value. And there's still a lot of room between the after repair value and that subject to, and there's enough room for us to put a second trust in there. because I'm covered by the after repair value. And then I'm also covered because the investor is going to go ahead and fix and flip it. So eventually we're going to get paid back within 3 to 6 months. So that's the new type that you guys probably haven't seen before. So it's called a subject to with a hard money loan. And again, that's another tool in your toolbox, right? You're using different types of lending to acquire one property. And we've done, like I said, we've done many hard money seconds on top of subject twos where the borrowers really put down no money down. They've did a subject two. We carried their down payment, we carried their renovation, and they've got into a deal which is paying closing costs. And so that's very beneficial to an investor. Then the fourth type of subject to deals is what's called the wrap around subject to. All right. Now this is a little bit more complicated, and follow me here. And I do have an example at the bottom for you guys to look at. This is where the seller sells his property, the buyer comes in and buys it with the subject to, but the seller creates what's called a wraparound mortgage wrapped around that subject to. And so where the seller makes their money is obviously they're going to get a down payment, right? And so they're going to sell their property for a pretty good price, but they're gonna go ahead and carry back a mortgage, a wraparound mortgage. Let's say the subject to loan was 3%. The seller might carry back a mortgage at 5% and make a 2% difference. And so I have a little bit of an example to explain this to hopefully make it a little bit more simplistic for you guys to understand, because I know that's a lot what I just covered, because you guys are probably asking yourself, well, what's a wraparound mortgage? What is that? How do you even do that? How do you record it? Is this a contract for deed? Is this a normal deed transfer? But in this case, this is a normal deed transfer. So what happens is in this $400,000 example, there's an existing mortgage at 3%. Okay. But the buyer has only come in with a very small down payment towards that $400,000 sales price. So they're only putting up $20,000. So what the seller is doing is they're going to go ahead and create a carryback mortgage at 380, right? It's on top of the existing mortgage, but it's 380. And part of that 380 is the $300,000 subject to. So once the seller carryback mortgage is at 380, they're earning 5% on that $80,000, which is the difference between the 380 and the 300. And then they're getting a 2% override on the $300,000 subject to. I know that's a lot to cover, but that's pretty much an example of the wraparound subject to. Are there any questions up to this point?
We do have some questions in the chat.
Yeah, doesn't surprise me. Bah. You guys feel
So,
free. Like I said, this is for you guys. This isn't for me. I already know all this stuff.
and Sharon, I'm not sure if this question's answered for you yet, but Sharon asked, what is the benefit to the seller if he's still liable for the note?
Well, the benefit to the seller is that they get their house sold. Like there's two different sellers. So the first seller, let's talk about the retail seller. The normal seller that you guys are used to dealing with as real estate agents. Um, the number one benefit is that they get the max price in their house. The second benefit is that hopefully they're going to make sure that whoever's going to take a subject to position on their property, that somebody's putting down a really large down payment to mitigate their risk on that mortgage. Now, if it's a VA subject to, the problem is that they don't get rid of their VA. Their VA eligibility is reduced because that mortgage is still out there. So that's a non-benefit. And I'll cover the advantages and disadvantages on a slide to the end of this presentation, if I haven't covered that entirely. Anything else?
Yep, who can write the property off on taxes?
That's a good question. So the 1098 is going to go to the Social Security of the person that has the mortgage. But one of the things that we do is we do what's called a specific power of attorney as part of the subject to transaction. And that's covered in that specific power of attorney to allow the buyer to go ahead and write off that interest on their taxes, because that's who's paying the mortgage. But the 1098 still is going to go to the Social Security number of whoever's on that mortgage. That's a pretty good question. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And then a list of title companies, which I can work with you on that. And we've got some that'll do it as well. So when we send out the recording, we can send out a couple of recommended title companies as well.
Yeah, and
So,
I think that's a good move. Just because, first of all, I'm sorry I didn't do this earlier. I wanted to thank Exit for allowing me to present today. And so, this is in conjunction with Exit. And so I think that's a good idea. Exit, they have certain title companies that they like to use. And so I like that. I think that's a good move. Have Exit send it out. I mean,
yeah,
I
and
obviously have,
I'll get some from you as well, and we'll kind
yeah.
of
All right.
match
That
that
sounds good.
with you.
Yep.
Okay. And then let's see, do you need to send the new deed recording to the seller's mortgage?
No, I wouldn't do that at all. As a matter of fact, I would suggest
Yeah,
not do that.
yeah,
Because what happens is, and I'll get into this in a second, I've got two different deeds, the way they look in Virginia and Maryland. And this is just from one lawyer. Obviously, other lawyers do it differently. But when we record a deed in both Maryland and Virginia, we record the deed, and part of that deed is the mortgage instrument number so that it is there in the public land records. And so that the public land records for us knows that this is a subject to transaction and it's recorded in the public land records. I would not send that deed to the servicer because one of the things that you're going to need to do is you're going to need to change the insurance anyway. So you're going to have to let that servicer know of an insurance change because you need to get yourself on there as the beneficiary because you don't want to keep the old owner's insurance policy out there because let's say if the house burned down, then the insurance is going to go to both the servicer, the insurance money is going to go to both the servicer and the old owner. So you don't want that. So the first thing that you're going to have to do anyway is change the insurance and put it in your name. And so once the servicer sees that, they're going to know that something's happened. But like I said, they very rarely, I've never seen a due on sale clause, but you're going to have to do that.
okay. Awesome. And then one last question, or actually, let's go on. Alta Grace, I'm going to ask you to, you said, where can a realtor find the resources? Can you reply to that and just be a little bit more specific of what specific resources you're looking for? And then we'll come back to the questions. We'll let you keep going.
Well, at the end, I've got a good chart that says how to find them and how to kind of go after them. I don't know if that's what they're talking about, but we'll see.
I'm
If
not
it's
sure either. We'll have her
all right,
clarify and then
fine,
we'll go from there.
we'll answer it. Okay. So
Yes.
this next part of the presentation is three type of deals that we've done subject to. One's a buy and hold. And it's owned to this day, which is why I didn't put the exact address. The other two are fix and flips that have been bought, fixed, flipped, and sold and sold. And so those are part of the public record. So you guys can kind of go and see that. And the reason I didn't put the address here is because an investor still owns this property, and I didn't kind of want the address to get out there and know who the investor was to protect them. Not that they wanted to be protected, but just because I didn't want to get to that scenario. So here's the background. It's a single family house. It was in Culpeper, Virginia, 3 bedroom, 2.5 baths, built 1998. There was it was a pre-foreclosure, vacant out of town owner. So it actually checked all of the investor boxes, right? Pre-foreclosure, house was vacant, and the owner is out of town. So it checks all the investor boxes. And the way that we know a pre-foreclosure, for those of you that don't understand, is that the reason why we found out about it is because what happens is when a note goes into foreclosure, it's advertised in the legal trustee sales ads in the newspaper, or you can find it online. So an ad does come out and it does say such and such property is in default of a certain mortgage instrument, and there's going to be a foreclosure date in some future time. And so that's how we found out about this pre-foreclosure. The original loan was back in 2015. It was a VHDA loan. This property is still subject to today and it's still in service today. So that's something that you got to realize. And I'll show you exactly when they bought it. The interest rate was 3.75%. It was a 30-year AM schedule. The mortgage arrearages was $44,002. So what does that mean? That means that in order to get that foreclosure sale canceled, you had to send the substitute trustee or the law firm $44,002 to stop the sale and bring the loan current. So keep that in mind because that's an important number. The other important number to remember is that the current loan amount was $192,500. They were making payments for 6-7 years. Looks like 6 years in this case. So the principal was about 192.5, but that also included the 44,002 was some of the principal part of that being paid down the loan. So once the loan was paid down, the 44,000, the actual leftover amount was 192.5 because part of that amount was in that 44,002 to bring it current. So you have to understand that. And what happened? Well, this is the one that we did outside of a title company. Matter of fact, we did it in New Jersey. Even though the property was in Culpeper, Virginia, we were at a Wells Fargo in New Jersey. I got a cashier check, gave it to the seller who was living in New Jersey because we found him. We drove up there, gave him a cashier check for $10,000. He signed and notarized the deed at a Wells Fargo. I sent the law firm $44,002 out to stop the foreclosure sale. And we basically then came back down to Culpeper, Virginia and recorded the deed. And so the way the purchase price looked is that it's 192.5, right? Because that's the amount of the mortgage that was left on it that was brought current. $10,000 went to the seller because he was happy to have gotten rid of this house because he had some unfortunate incident that happened in the houses. His wife died, and so he was, pretty much just letting it go. And he was glad to have sold it to somebody who was going to keep it. And then the $44,002, which was to bring it current. So the total purchase price, including the subject to loan at 192.5, was 245,502. Now, fixed up, that property had at the time an after repair value of $375,000. Because if I go back to the above slide, this happened around November 8th, 2001. And so this loan has been out there as subject to for almost 3 years and a couple months. Okay. So the loan payment was $1,365. That was a principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. The rental at the time on this property was $1,950. And so the positive cash flow was $585. And mind you, I do say was because this was almost 3 years ago and the rents have gone up. Right. And the only thing that I'm not including in this chart is that there was about $15,000 to get the property rent ready. Had to replace some carpets, had to do some painting. It was a one-level house, so not much else needed to be done. Some roof shingles needed to be replaced. So on top of that 245,502, there was about $15,000 of a renovation just to get it rent ready. And so the all-in price was $260,000. So if I told you today that you had a property that you were all in at $260,000, the ARV was $375, you had a $115,000 equity position. And oh, by the way, the booby prize is you're making a cash flow of $585 a month. I think you guys would all take that, right? And so the answer is yeah. And so where we came in on the transaction was that I'm the one that put up the $10,000 to get to the seller. I'm the one that put up the 44,002. So I was in second position at $54,002. And so I eventually got paid off. But for me as a second trust holder, I mean, that was a really good return for me. And so that's one of the things that we did on as far as Clear Sky was concerned. Any questions on this deal? I'm doing okay on time, right?
Oh yeah, you're
All
fine.
right.
And
Okay.
we do have a couple questions in here.
Okay.
So one is, which you haven't really started talking about the marketing yet and how to find them, but there's a question about PIFA. Do you want to cover that when you cover the marketing?
Question about what?
PIFA, the Protection of
Okay.
Homeowners and Foreclosure Act.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, we'll cover it. Mhm.
okay,
But ask that question though when I get there.
gotcha.
Yeah.
And then the resources were, it sounds like you're going to cover that. And then I had one more.
Yeah, because that question sounds like it was from the state of Maryland question.
What is the process for a buyer who can never be qualified for a loan? Like, I mean, anybody
Okay.
can lend.
That's a good
Yeah.
question. So let's
Okay.
say, all right. Okay, I'm going to cover it in two different ways. The
Okay.
first way, I'm going to cover it with an investor buyer who can't qualify for a loan. Okay. And that's where you go ahead and find an asset like this one that is in distress. That's maybe a pre-foreclosure. That's maybe got a tax lien against it that maybe the vacant or blighted. And so you have to go out there and find a distressed seller, somebody who's very motivated. Because I'm assuming that you might not have cash. But if you're an investor, you don't really need the cash. You just got to go find it. Now, if you're a retail buyer that has bad credit and can't qualify, and you want to buy one of these houses in a normal retail sale, subject to, well, what you need to do to bridge the gap is you're going to have to come up with a pretty good cash component part of that deal. And so a lot of times, if someone's going to sell a house and do a subject to, they might require you to put a 25% down payment in cash so that they're going to make sure that you keep making those mortgage payments. Because the seller of that house that still has a subject to out there, the number one thing that they're going to want to know, well, that's if they're a sophisticated enough seller. Most sellers don't even know that this exists. But they're going to want to make sure that you're going to pay that mortgage every single month, and that you have a plan to eventually pay it back. But you don't really need to do your plan, but you just got to make sure. And in this next example that I'm going to talk about, it was one of those examples where I could have kept it as a buy and hold, but I made sure that I told the seller, I guaranteed to the seller that we were just going to go ahead and fix and flip it. And so he was happy because it was a VA loan, and I'll cover that on the next chart. Any other questions?
There's one last question, which is, can you please explain the 115K equity position?
Yeah, okay. So you see where it says 245,502 was the purchase price? You guys understand how I came up with those numbers? The 192.5 was when the loan was brought current, that was the remaining principal balance, 192,500. The 10,000 was the number that I gave to the owner to sign off on the deed, magic number. You're going to see there's some magic numbers in this presentation. 10,000 is one of them, 100,000 is another one. And then the 44,002 was the amount of money that had to be sent to the substitute trustee, the law firm, to cancel the foreclosure auction and bring that loan current. So those three numbers added together is 245,502. Then I said the house needed about $15,000 of additional work to renovate it to get it rental ready. So I just simply added 15 to 245. I got $260,000 because now I'm all in at 260 because that included the renovation, right? And so I just subtracted 375 from 260 and I got a $115,000 equity position. That's all. Because at the time the house was purchased, what was it, November 2001, 2018, no, 2021, that the ARV, the after repair value of the house was 375. And the way we got that was just by doing comps. Remember, I said earlier it was a cookie cutter subdivision. So it was an easy subdivision within Culpeper to actually figure out an after repair value. So at that point in time, if they were to take that house and sell it, they would have gotten about 375,000 for it. Now that we're keeping it as a rental, at that point in time, 260 all in minus the 375 after repair value, their equity position is 115. Yeah, follow that? Good. All right, next deal.
Okay, and
And
just, I keep getting the question, yes, it's recorded, and we will send it out after, and he is going to go over how to find the properties, and
Yep.
this is just gonna be our first session in a series. So there'll be additional sessions after this.
Right, but not on subject two. I'm going to be able to cover subject two. I'm almost done. So I'll be done in about 20 minutes. So I'll be able to cover subject two. Next week, I'll do it on hard money lending. X's
Okay,
and O's of hard
perfect.
money. But
Okay,
the
perfect.
subject two, I'll finish this today.
Yes, yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, next deal. I've got the address in here because I know one of the things that we do in this business is we trust and verify. And so anything that we've done, I'll go ahead and put the address in there so you guys can see it and you guys can follow it. And this is one that we recently made, and CSP stands for Clear Sky Properties. That's my other holding company. It's called Clear Sky Properties. That's why I put CSP in there. And so the scenario was 2-bedroom, 1-bath condo, built in 1992. It was a smaller unit, 1,144 square feet. It was in a development in Dumfries called Stockbridge. I don't know if you guys, on the Virginia side, you guys are pretty familiar with that. The property was purchased March 16th, 2008. It was a VA loan for 185,940. That was the original amount. 3 7/8 was the principal, and 3 7/8 was the interest rate. It's a 30-year AM. The payment was $872.48. Taxes $2,802. Condo fee $265. Now, the property was vacant Oh, I spelled lease. It was vacant for at least 1 year, not lease. Sorry, guys, one error. Um, we got the property as a referral from a real estate agent. Um, an EXP agent referred us the deal. The current loan balance when we got this lead, and I'll cover the date we purchased it and the date we sold it in the next chart. And it was this year. But the current balance on the VA loan was about 168 from the time that we purchased it. The loan was current, but the distress of the property was not only was it vacant for a year, out of town owner, but the owner had a flood in the property that had to be cleaned up. It was about, 3 or 4 inches worth of water. And so he shop vac to clean it up, but it sat for a year through cold and hot. And so there was a little bit of mildew, on the shoe mold and that kind of thing. So that had to be ripped out, and about 5, 6 inches of drywall had to be cut around the property. And so it was, a little bit of distress, not a financial distress, but just more of a distressed seller because he was vacant for a year. He got it, he had a family change and he moved to Maryland. And so he wanted to unload the property. So we came in, we purchased it for $200,000. The subject to loan balance was 168. So we just kept that in place. We did this closing with a normal title company, $32,000 cash bring to the table. Seller closing fees were included. So we actually probably brought about 32 plus another $4,000 to close it. So we probably brought 36,000 in total to the table. And so we owned a property with the ARV of about 285, and we owned that thing for $200,000. It was a very small renovation. It needed floors. It needed some touch-up paint. Needed some light fixtures changed into can lights. The bathroom, believe it or not, was in good shape. We had to do a new appliance package in the kitchen, and then we sold it for 285 with 6,500 back for 278.5. Our purchase date was September of this year, 2023. The sell date was December 15th, 2023. So that was less than a 90-day flip. And for us, that's pretty good, especially in the Northern Virginia market. And especially if you got a smaller flip and less renovation, you should be able to get in and out 90 to 120 days. So we were out in 90 days. We made 3 payments on the subject to for that we did. And the way we did that is that the seller, I had a good rapport with the seller. And so the seller literally gave us his VHDA user ID and password, and we just continued to make the payments through that portal on the subject too. And, the reason why on the previous slide, I put in the other financial numbers, the PI payment of 872.48, the annual taxes being 2802, and the condo fee was because this guy rented out for like $1,800, $1,850 a month. So from a cash flow standpoint, we would have made 500-600 bucks a month in positive cash flow. We could have kept it as a rental. As a matter of fact, I kind of wanted to keep it as a rental, but I made a deal with the seller that we would go ahead and fix it, flip it, because he wanted his VA entitlement back, and he wanted us to close up the loan. And so, I obliged. That's just one thing you do out here, is you just got to make certain deals with folks and make them feel comfortable that you're the buyer. And I did that. And so that's what happened with that deal. Any questions on that fix and flip? Okay, so that deal was us fixing and flip, but the previous deal was where I was a second trust holder on a buy and hold. And the third deal that I want to cover is where we came in as Clear Sky Financial as a second trust on a fix and flip uh, with a subject to. And so this background is a townhouse in Dale City, Virginia, 3218 Birchdale Square, 1968 built. Again, we love the cookie cutter subdivisions, and the reason we love that is because they're easier to comp out. It was a N unit, 2-level townhouse, 4 bedrooms, 2 full baths, 2 half baths. We like that too, right? 2 levels. It's much easier to renovate, much quicker to renovate, get in and get out. The house was a rental for 20 plus years, out of town owner, right? And so the house wasn't in great shape because they kept it as a rental, and this property was actually purchased as part of 3 properties. They did a subject to on 3 properties. This happened to be one out of the 3. And the person that bought it owned a property management company, and he was actually managing this property for 15, 20 years. And so he was the one that had the good rapport with the seller, and he was able to arrange this deal. And I'll cover that in a second. The original loan was 133,900, originated back in 2013. I'm not exactly sure what the interest rate was on it, but I do know that it had a 30-year AM schedule. And I do know what the current loan amount when he purchased it, April 30th, 2020, was 120,37, because I saw the payoff on the HUD HUD one, because we were the second trust holder on it. And so I knew the payoff was 120,37. So the purchase price was 168,336. Subject to loan balance was 120,37. And so the amount of money that went to the seller was about $48,000. It was an as is where is buy, and the property was vacant at the time. The seller closing fees were included in that number. The after repair value was about 295. So this guy was getting a good deal. And so what we did is we came, once the deal was being done and he owned it, we put a second trust on top of the subject to for $75,000. So the $75,000 covered the $50,000 in renovation, but it also covered about $25,000 of his down payment into the $48,000. So this particular guy came up with about $23,000 plus closing costs. So he owned this property for about $30,000 all in. He went ahead and renovated it. He flipped it for 293, a little bit less than the 295 ARV, but he did that May, June, July. Again, this was, let's see, no, April, May, June. Yeah, it was about a 4-month flip, 3-month flip. Yeah, so that was a subject to deal where we were the second trust holder. And like I said, I mean, we don't have any problem being a second trust holder on subject to deals, especially in the fix and flip space, because I know, it's going to get fixed and flipped and we're going to get our money back fairly quick. And how do we make money, right? So I made money on this because I originated the $75,000 second trust, but I'm making money on, on points. I'm making money on lender fees. He's paying us every month. I think this particular thing went out at 12% and 5 points. So he was paying me $750 a month plus 5 points on it, whatever that was, 5% of 75. So that's how we made our money. I mean, it wasn't a lot of money, but I mean, for us, it helped an investor fix and flip a property and made them a lot of money. And so that's kind of why we're in business on the hard money side. Any questions on that deal? All right, good. Either this topic is easy or I put you guys to sleep. I hope you guys are awake. I can't tell because I'm sitting here looking at this chart. I don't see your faces. All right. Here's an example of a subject to deed in Maryland. And the reason why I put this in there is because you have to understand what certain title companies do things differently. This is just how some of the deals that we've been a part of, and this is just how we've done it. And so it's a normal deed, right? It conveys, it puts the price in there, but the thing that you got to focus on is towards the bottom of the deed. It's going to go subject to a certain deed of trust from somebody to somebody for 132,000, subject to another deed of trust, right? In this particular case, they did a subject to on 2 loans. So not only is the deed recorded of the transfer of the title, but the words subject to are in there in a public recorded fashion. And I think that's one of the reasons why more title companies came to fruition as far as doing the kinds of deals, because as long as they're saying that this is their form of disclosure to prevent anybody from suing them. And so this is, I think, one of the reasons why more title companies are doing these deals. So that's Maryland. Here's an example of one in Virginia. A little bit more detailed, but again, it's just a normal deed conveying the title, right? I didn't put names on this one. I put names on the other one by accident. But on this particular case, it's still the same thing, right? It has the deed transfer, the deed's recorded, you now own the property, but it does say specifically subject to the liens. And I think the other reason why that's there is because if you're going to do a fix and flip, or even if you're going to go to sell it, it puts the other title company that's doing that transaction, let's say 5, 10, 20 years from now, it puts them on notice to go ahead and do a further lien search on that property to get the correct instrument number, and so that they can order the correct payoff. And so that's another reason why it's there. Subject to deals, I'm getting close to the end. The next two slides, basically subject to advantages, disadvantages, and I'll go into how you find them. The advantages, like we talked about, interest rate, terms of the existing note. What I mean by that is obviously the AM schedule comes into play. You have to understand that, and how far they are into the AM schedule. There's no application documentation. There's no credit check. Um, there's a lower barrier of entry, minimal down payment, if any. Especially if you're an investor and you go into creative financing and you do it the right way. Like I said, that one townhouse deal that we put a second trust on, they didn't come up with hardly any money. And the one buy and hold deal, the investor came up with no money because I carried the 10,000, I carried the second trust 44,000, I carried the 54,000. All they had to do was put in a rental grade renovation and they own the house. So they hardly put in any money. Um, Further into the amortization schedule, the further you are, the better, right? Because more principal's getting paid down. Cash flow and equity, right? Especially if you're going to do this as buy and holds and you can take advantage of the lower interest rate. Oh, that's perfect. And so that's what you want. You want to, if you're going to keep it as a buy and hold, the lower the interest rate, the better. Because those rental rates are going to keep going up because there's not much inventory for normal rentals. Disadvantages, you need to understand this. Banks can call the loan 100% due on ownership change if they choose to. Another reason why the banks don't do it is because the bank would much rather have a performing loan that's been performing than to get that money back and reissue it on another loan that could be a little bit more risky. And then you're saying to yourself, well, the bank can simply lend that money back out at a higher interest rate. Of course, they're going to want to do that. And the answer is no, they don't. They would much rather have a performing loan portfolio than to take another loan and originate it, even though the interest rates are higher because that loan is fraught with more risk than a loan that's been paying 5, 6, 7 years straight. Okay, so keep that in mind. Banks would rather have a performing asset portfolio because they're not in the business of having distressed loans. The former owner is still on the hook for the obligation. Obviously, that's not a disadvantage to the buyer, but it's certainly a disadvantage to the seller. So you just got to educate your sellers on what this is and what their liabilities are. But what it does do is, let's say their credit's banged up, right? And it went into pre-foreclosure and they decided to do a subject to on a pre-foreclosure, and then the investor comes by and the investor is paying timely payments like they should be doing, then guess what? That owner's credit's going to go up because their credit's still being reported on that instrument. So their credit will increase. So that's positive. The insurance change, like I said earlier, you got to make sure that you do a insurance change because you got to get your name on there as a beneficiary of that insurance policy in case something happens. Um, the other thing that you need to do is do a power of attorney, a limited power of attorney with the seller, because in case you go to sell that house, you're going to need to want to get information from the servicer. And so by giving the servicer that limited power of attorney, they'll be able to give you the information because the loan is still in the seller's name. And getting back to that question on the foreclosure, and I'll cover how to find these properties in the next slide. But to get back to that question, my guess is it came from a Maryland agent or somebody in Maryland, and that's a good question. In dealing with pre-foreclosures in Virginia, you're allowed to advertise to pre-foreclosure people in Virginia. You can go by the house, drop off a brochure. You can mail to that house. You can do these kinds of things in Virginia. In Maryland, you cannot do certain things because that's considered predatory. And you really have got to understand the foreclosure predatory laws in Maryland. So, for example, if I have a house, let's say somewhere in Oxon Hill on a particular street, and I know one of the houses is going to a foreclosure, it's a pre-foreclosure, and it's got a low loan amount and a lot of equity. If I drop a brochure off on that house, I had better go to every single house on that street because you cannot just go to that house and then leave because under Maryland statute, that's considered predatory. That's considered predatory and they ixnay that. They don't like that. So you just got to check your laws on what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do in the pre-foreclosure world. I hope I answered it. I think I did. Yeah. Did I answer it?
I would say yes. We'll see
Okay.
if the person wants to comment anymore.
Okay. Okay. Hopefully they're awake. I didn't put them to
Yeah.
sleep. All right. How do you find these things? And again, the reason why I'm talking about this is uh, pre-foreclosure ads is probably not a bad way to find it, right? All the pre-foreclosure ads, some of them have the loan amount and the interest rate on the ads. All ads are not created equal. All ads have what's called the foreclosing instrument, which is recorded in the courthouse steps, which will be the deed of trust. The deed of trust might not have the interest rate and loan amount. Some do, some don't. So you just got to figure out if that's a subject to. If the loan was originated between 2019 and 2022, odds are it's got a low interest rate. So that's one that you want to attack. Um, Look for out-of-town owners. Same thing on the investor side. Uh, get knowledgeable and get to know investor-friendly realtors. Hopefully, some of you guys on here are investor-friendly agents. If you are, make yourself known because you're going to be the most popular person in the group. Subject to mailers, that's something that I know folks do, but you focus on lists where the mortgage originations were between 2019 and 2022. So for example, if you're looking to build up your renter portfolio, you might go ahead and get some folks whose mortgage originations were between that timeline and go ahead and mail to them. Driving for dollars is a good way to find it. Vacants, blighteds, title searches on origination date of loans. So you can, partner up with the title company. Not easily said and done. And so those are just some ways, not all the ways, but those are just some creative ways that, you guys can maybe start looking for these things. But one of the things that you have to realize is that the hardest thing about this is finding the deals. The hardest thing about anything on the investing space is finding the deals. The financing side of it is pretty simple. It's actually finding the deals, and that's the most challenging part on the investing side. And that's it. Not so bad. I think I did this in a little over an hour. So
Perfect. We still have a few questions if you still have a little bit
yeah,
of time for
yeah,
us.
no problem. I have. Hey, look, I have until you guys have to leave.
Okay.
Look, it's Friday. It's snowy. I like to do stuff on Fridays because my schedule's not as tight, and so we'll do this as long as you guys want to keep asking questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Charlie. Our next question was, when you make the offer, do you skip the inspection? What is the document that you use to protect your buyer? Example would be like if the seller doesn't pay the mortgage.
Right. So it just depends, right? So I'm going to caveat this in two answers. The first one is if you're an investor and you're buying it and you're getting a great deal, yeah, that's an as is where is deal, right? That's an as is where is. If you're a normal buyer in a normal retail market buying a normal retail listing, then I always suggest you get a home inspection. I'll never say not get one because especially if you're paying a retail top of the market price, you better get a home inspection just to protect you. And so that's something that we always say you should do. But on the investor side, it's a little bit different. If you're used to buying as is, where is properties and you're used to evaluating them from a renovation standpoint, then I say no, don't get an inspection because that's part of the deal. Part of the deal is you do a subject to on a distressed property, you close in a week or less, and you buy it as is, where is. And so that's part of you getting and winning the deal. What was the other question?
Um, I think that was, yeah, the inspection and then the document that you use to protect your buyer.
Okay,
Example,
so
if the seller doesn't pay the
oh,
mortgage.
yeah, right. So each title company has a different 1 or 2 page document, right? And so for us, it depends. If it's an investor type deal, we have like a little simple 3 or 4 page contract that we use that actually has a subject to option. And so that's just the contract that we use to purchase it. But then each title company we use, there's like a 2 page document that discloses to the seller what they need to know. Like they're still responsible for the liability. The insurance is going to change. You know, just make sure that they're full disclosure because as realtors, and I'm one of you too, I happen to be an investor first, but I'm still a realtor. We abide by the code of ethics, and that code of ethics is disclose, disclose, disclose. So you got to just make sure that your subject to friendly title company has a 1 or 2 pager that they put in place. I should have probably gotten one and used it. As far as this presentation is concerned, maybe I'll add it, but that's a good question. So you do want to have it fully documented, fully disclosed on exactly what's going on.
And I'm just going to say, because I know we have a bunch of people from a lot of different brokerages.
Yep.
This is kind of like not our traditional type transaction. So please make sure that you pull your broker into it.
Yeah. For
especially if
sure.
it's your first time doing a deal like this, make sure that you pull the broker in it, and they'll probably be able to,
Yeah.
like, guide you as far as title company attorneys and making sure that your client's protected.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And this is one of the things I'm going to pitch to you guys is that, especially with Exit Realty and the smaller brokers, they don't mind handling these kinds of one-off transactions. They're built for that. It's the bigger brokers of the world, the Long and Fosters, the Remaxes, Century 21s, the bigger brands that kind of, you know, they kind of shy away from these kinds of transactions and don't necessarily want to do them. So you definitely have got to talk to your managing broker at whatever office you're at to make sure that this is going to fly, because this isn't a one size fits all. Even in the REO days back in 2008, 9, and 10, a lot of the bigger brokers didn't want to touch real estate owned properties from a listing standpoint. They were just worried about getting sued, and so they don't want to touch it. Same thing with subject to. A lot of these bigger brands might not want to touch a subject to transaction, so you better have clearance from your broker.
Okay, thank you. And then the next one is, what happens when the seller wants to do a 1031 exchange with the proceeds? And would this qualify for creative financing?
Uh, sure, that could happen. Seller could do a 1031 exchange. So, for example, if the seller is selling a rental, right, they certainly can't do a 1031 exchange with their primary residence. So, for those of you who do not know what a 1031 exchange is, 1031 is a 1031 Starker exchange. 1031 is the IRS code, and that's where an investor sells a property. They sell an investment property. They have 40 and like kind exchange. They can exchange it for another property with the gains being tax deferred underneath 1031. But the rules are the investor has 45 days to identify a property or properties to buy. It's got to be a like kind exchange. And then they have 6 months to close on it. Now, this would pertain to if a seller is selling a rental property and it's a subject to or non-subject to, they have, let's say, $100,000 capital gain. They just have to buy another investment property within the 45-day identification period and the 6-month closing period. They need a 1031 exchange agent to actually hold the money, to hold the proceeds, and then they can go ahead and do that. So it works in the subject to field if they're selling their property subject to. I mean, that just tells me that that seller is a little bit more sophisticated and they understand it. If I were a seller and I was selling an investment property due to a subject to, I would probably do both. I'd probably make them come up with a good sized down payment, but I would probably slap a second trust on top of that subject too and do a wraparound, kind of like that example I showed, to create more interest income as well. But that's just me.
Okay, thank you, thank you. And then the next one is, can you do a subject to when a couple's getting divorced and wants to sell?
Yeah, I mean that's another great question. Keep them coming. The name of the game is to find distressed sellers, right? That's another distressed scenario. And so the only problem with a divorce scenario and doing that is, remember, if I'm assuming both parties are on title and both parties are on the loan. If that's the case, both parties have got to agree. Now, if you're getting divorced and the husband's the only one on the deed of trust and the note, then he just has to agree to the subject to. But if the husband and wife are both on it, or in these days, husband, husband, wife, wife, whatever the scenario might be, if both their names are on it, the deed of trust and the note, then they both got to agree to the subject to. That could complicate things because odds are they're not agreeing in the first place.
Okay, thank you. Can they include the repairs in the 1031 exchange?
When you say repairs, as far as what now, in a 1031 exchange, the repairs will offset your gains. So if I've got that $150,000 profit on a property and I've made $25,000, $30,000 repairs over the years, then actually my profit's only 120 grand, right? Your capital gains is only based off that 120 grand. It's not the entire 150. So you're writing your repairs against the capital gains number of your profit. So then your 1031 is only but you still need to do a like kind exchange.
Okay. And I think I got them all. If I missed you, go ahead and go to the bottom and raise your hand. We'll make sure that we get your questions answered regarding this. And then Charlie, while we're seeing if there's any additional questions, you want to tell them what you're going to talk about in the next session?
Yeah, so we're going to do another session next week. Thanks for bringing that up. I would have forgot. Um, the X's and O's of hard money lending. So this will teach you guys as investors just another way of creatively buying a fix and flip or a buy and hold, or a bridge loan, or if you're a wholesaler, transactional type of loan. So it's just another creative financing way to purchase properties as an investor with limited money down. Renovation costs are included, and so that's next week's presentation: X's and O's of hard money lending.
Thank you so much. And y'all are welcome to invite others. We kind of coordinated this through Exit since that's who I'm associated with, but we open it up to everyone, which we do with a lot of our training. So this is for anybody in our industry. So please feel free to
Yeah.
share with your colleagues, any other lenders, any other agents that are just interested in investing. That is one thing, is as a real estate professional, it would be amazing if we could have more realtors take advantage of investing in property. It's what we do, and it can make a world of difference in your future. So, help us
Yeah.
educate our realtor, community.
Yeah, and I don't mean to be biased, but I really feel that uh, the brokers have a fiduciary responsibility to not only educate their agents to do business and make as much money as they can on the commission side, but they also have the responsibility to teach you guys how to invest. Because at the end of the day, it's all about building wealth and and passive cash flows, right? Because while we're all young and we're all making all this money, eventually we're going to be old, and you guys are going to want more passive income streams to sort of make you financially independent, right? And one of the last houses that we bought at the courthouse steps in Prince William County was from a agent who was in the Remax Hall of Fame. And I knew her, and I knew her well. And I was so saddened to see her beautiful single family house go to foreclosure after being in the Remax Hall of Fame. And so I was absolutely astonished. And so I think as agents, the brokers, and I want to thank Nikita because she gets it, right? You guys need to be educated on the investment space as well, because the more educated you are on the investment space, it's going to help you more on the retail side, and it'll help you make more commission dollars on the retail side. And so it's just a beautiful circle.
Thank you so much. And then you have one final question. So how do you get the property out of the subject to?
You sell it or you refinance it. But the whole thing behind the refinance is that, remember, you're subject to it into a lower interest rate. So the odds on you refinancing it, if you're a buy and hold investor, you're probably not going to refinance it. So usually the number one thing is you sell the property and then the loan gets paid off if you're a fix and flipper. But if you're a buy and holder, that's a little bit more risky. But as they're paying down your loan, I mean, principal's principal's going down, principal's going down, principal going down. The after repair values, especially if you're in a nice, metropolitan area like us, or you're in the suburbs, odds are prices are going to stay neutral. They're going to keep going up. So, forces are on your side. So there's not really much risk. Just depends on what the property is.
Okay.
All right.
Awesome. We want to thank everybody. I know we went a little bit over, but I think the question and answer is just so important. And we really appreciate you for all the information. We're looking forward to the rest of the series with
Yeah.
you. And everyone we will also send Charlie's information when we send the follow-up with the link. We'll send you some investor-friendly title companies that can
Yep.
do these type of deals. We'll send you Charlie's contact information, and we'll also send you the registration link for next week. So thank you so much. And again,
Yep.
feel free to invite anyone on next week. And thanks again, Charlie, for your time. We really
Yeah.
appreciate
Thanks for
it.
having me too. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. We'll see you next week.
Have a good weekend, everybody.
All right. Bye, everybody.